welcome to the English BookCast. Today we're going to be diving deep, really deep, into Robert Greene's 33 Strategies of War Tactics and Principles.
Yeah.
Before we start, though, if you're enjoying these deep dives, exploring these really insightful books with us, please join the English BookCast channel and share this content. Help us grow. Really appreciate that. So you've shared some really fascinating insights from Greene's work.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible book.
Yeah.
It has so much in there.
Yeah, it's dense. I mean, every page is just
You could reread this book 10 times and get something new every time.
Totally, yeah. So today, our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to kind of unpack some of these core principles of strategy. But moving beyond simple aggression, we're going to explore maneuvering, psychological warfare, that kind of thing.
Subtle stuff.
The subtle, yeah.
Yeah.
How you maintain the upper hand, Could be a personal conflict, could be professional, political, doesn't matter. And I think what's really interesting is how Greene shows you that understanding these strategies gives you an edge, a real edge, without just resorting to brute force.
It's not just about being the strongest or the loudest or, the most aggressive. It's about being smart.
Totally. You mentioned that you're really interested in gaining knowledge quickly and thoroughly, and those
Moments. That's what I live for.
Right, those epiphanies. Well, this book, I think, is jam-packed with them. So prepare to see familiar situations in a completely new light, almost like you've got these new glasses on or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's start with this idea that victory doesn't always come from just that direct clash. Greene talks about maneuvering an opponent into weakness. He calls it the ripening for the sickle strategy.
Yeah.
And it's more than just being strong, like we were saying. It's about recognizing that endless direct battles, they're exhausting, number one, but they're also strategically kind of short-sighted.
They take so much out of you, and then you end up losing anyway.
Right. So the truly skilled strategist, the person who really understands these principles, they aim to maneuver their opponent into a weak position before the big confrontation. So victory is almost inevitable at that point. It's swift and it's decisive.
It's like setting up the dominoes so that they all fall. You just have to tip that first one.
Exactly. It's about control. It's about setting the stage. What do you think about that?
Well, I think what's fascinating here is this underlying principle, which Greene talks about a lot, of creating dilemmas for your opponent. And this isn't just about giving them a set of bad options. It's it's more insidious than that. It's about crafting this whole scenario where any choice they make actually plays into your advantage.
Wow.
It's you're setting the stage so effectively that their actions lead them right into this trap that you've set.
So they almost defeat themselves.
They do. It's almost like jujitsu in a way. It's you're using their energy against them. You're thinking about, okay, what are their core needs? What do they really want? And then you structure the situation so that fulfilling one of those needs actually compromises another.
Ooh, I like that.
So it creates internal conflict, and they become vulnerable because they're divided against themselves.
And you just sit back and you watch.
You just kind of nudge things along in the right direction. And it really echoes Sun Tzu, like you were saying before about this isn't new. This has been around forever.
Thousands of years.
Sun Tzu, arguably, one of the ultimate strategists in the art of war, centuries ago.
I mean, that's strategy 101.
It is. But his ideal was to win without even shedding blood, right? He believed that by exploiting those psychological vulnerabilities, like we were talking about, and maneuvering your opponents into positions where they just can't hold on, creating all this frustration, all this confusion, you could achieve this mental collapse in the enemy. And they surrender before you ever have to really fight them.
It's they're defeated before the battle even begins.
Exactly.
I like that. So we see this, history is full of examples where this kind of strategic maneuvering was just way more decisive than brute force alone, way more effective. What are some examples that come to mind for you?
Well, consider Scipio Africanus in Spain. He was up against Hannibal. And rather than engaging Hannibal's forces head on all the time, which is, probably a bad idea, he would focus on disrupting their supply lines, isolating them, weakening them strategically over time. So by the time the actual confrontation happened, they were already on the ropes.
It's a war of attrition almost.
Exactly.
It's a slow burn.
Or think about Napoleon. Napoleon at Ulm, his brilliant encirclement of the Austrian army, it wasn't about a single bloody battle. It was this series of really rapid maneuvers, really smart maneuvers that left the Austrians totally cut off. And they were basically forced to surrender because they had nowhere to go.
You had no options left.
They had no options left.
I mean, even T.E. Lawrence of Arabia,
Yeah.
his campaigns in the desert during World War I, those weren't about large-scale battles, the traditional way of fighting a war.
Right.
It was about exploiting the Ottoman Empire's vulnerabilities through these strategic raids, these hit-and-run tactics, and creating this widespread disruption that made it almost impossible for them to function effectively.
Right, like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, I like that. So for you, the listener, think about situations in your own life, right, where a head-on confrontation, you feel like it would just be so draining and probably wouldn't even be that productive.
Yeah, we all have those.
Right. How could you apply this principle of, the ripening for the sickle? Like, think about how you could subtly kind of create those circumstances where others find themselves making choices that aren't really in their best interest and that ultimately benefit your objectives.
It's like playing chess, but it's life.
Yeah.
It's like four-dimensional chess.
It is. It's about skillful positioning. It's about creating those unfavorable odds for the other side rather than just like, going in with your fists swinging.
Right.
So we've talked about maneuvering. Let's get into the mind a little bit. Greene really emphasizes that the mind is the battlefield.
Yeah.
Right? He spends a lot of time talking about strategic intelligence, like truly understanding the enemy's mind.
Yeah.
And he makes this point that like your primary target isn't the physical resources, it isn't their, troops on the ground. It's the mind of their leader, the key decision maker.
It's the one calling the shots.
Exactly. So if you can understand how they think, their motivations, their biases, their fears, you've got a huge advantage. What do you think?
I think it makes perfect sense. If you can anticipate their moves, because you understand how they prioritize things, what their values are, you're basically playing chess while they're still trying to figure out checkers.
Right. You're like levels above them.
Yeah. But like Greene cautions, right? The biggest pitfall here is this tendency to project our own way of thinking onto other people. Like we think, oh, well, if I were in that situation, I would do this, so they're probably going to do that too.
And that's what they should do.
Right, exactly. But that's not how it works.
Everyone's got their own like baggage, their own experiences.
Exactly. So you have to resist that urge to assume that they'll react the way you would. And instead, you have to like put yourself in their shoes.
Try to see through their eyes.
See the world through their eyes.
That's hard, though. That's like a real skill.
It is, but it's essential if you want to be a good strategist.
So you've got to be like a student of human nature.
Yeah.
A little bit of a psychologist, maybe.
Absolutely.
So Greene introduces this really powerful concept. He calls it a telescope directed. It's basically like having this network of informants, these reliable people out in the field, who can give you real-time, accurate information.
It's like having eyes and ears everywhere.
Yeah, your spies.
Right.
And he uses Napoleon as an example. He says Napoleon would use, like, younger officers. Almost like an internal spy brigade.
It's interesting.
Throughout his army. And these guys, they were closer to the action.
Yeah.
They could offer insights, intelligence that maybe wouldn't go through the formal channels,
Right.
like wouldn't make it up to the top. So Napoleon had this much clearer, much more immediate picture of what was happening.
So it's like having like a back channel of information.
Exactly. And it's so valuable because it allows you to pick up on these subtle shifts, potential threats, emerging opportunities that you might totally miss otherwise.
You can't be everywhere at once.
Right. And then Greene kind of brings it in a little bit. He talks about internal challenges, within your own group. He calls these political animals.
Yes. Those are the tricky ones.
These are the folks who are maybe more focused on their own personal agendas, climbing the ladder.
Yeah.
Than they are on the mission.
Right.
They might undermine your directives, exploit loopholes, or create these like divisions that you're not even aware of.
They're playing their own game.
Yeah, and it can be so destructive. Greene uses Queen Elizabeth I as an example. Good Queen Bess. She was known for being super discreet about her own opinion.
She kept her cards close to her chest.
Exactly. By not revealing her hand too early, it made it harder for those ambitious courtiers to just mirror her views,
Right.
To like suck up.
Yeah, they couldn't just parrot her and then pursue their own agendas.
Exactly. So she could actually gauge their true motivations. Like, what were they really after? So this is a great takeaway for the listener.
Absolutely.
It's worth asking yourself, how deeply do you truly understand the motivations, the vulnerabilities, maybe even the hidden agendas of the people that you're interacting with?
Yeah.
Whether it's professional, personal, whatever. Are you actively looking for information, going beyond just the surface and really trying to, like, gather that intelligence.
Yeah. Are you paying attention to the nonverbal cues,
Yes, those are so important.
the inconsistencies in their behavior?
Totally. And are you vigilant about identifying those political animals in your own circle,
Yeah.
right? The people who might be subtly working against what you're trying to achieve.
It's like having a good radar for those kinds of things.
Yeah. So developing this kind of like strategic awareness of the human landscape, I think, is absolutely crucial.
It's like a superpower.
It is. So we've talked about maneuvering. We've talked about understanding the enemy's mind. Now let's build on that. Let's talk about psychological encirclement and creating pressure.
All right, let's turn up the heat.
Yeah. And this isn't always about like a literal encirclement, like being surrounded by troops.
Right.
It's more about a strategic approach where you systematically cut off those escape routes for your opponent.
Yeah.
You make them feel trapped, overwhelmed. You're basically limiting their options, making them feel squeezed.
It's like a boa constrictor, slowly tightening its grip.
Yeah. There's that feeling of suffocation.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily through overwhelming force. It's more about like consistent pressure from all sides.
Multiple angles.
Yeah, multiple angles.
To keep them guessing.
And the key is to cut off their access to the outside world. That could be information, could be support from their allies, or just resources that they need to keep going.
Like isolating them, right?
Yeah.
Making them feel alone. And what's the goal of all this?
The goal is to break their will, make them indecisive, and ultimately, surrender. When someone feels completely surrounded, cut off, they're paralyzed by fear. They don't know what to do.
It's like that deer in the headlights.
Exactly. Greene calls it a psychological siege.
Hmm.
And, think about what that feels like, right? The anxiety builds. You overreact to every little setback. You feel like you're losing control. And that's more debilitating than any physical attack.
It's like you're under siege from within.
Exactly.
So have you ever felt that way? Like you're surrounded, intensely pressured, even if it wasn't a literal siege?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think we all have.
Yeah. Maybe it was a negotiation, where you felt cornered.
Yeah.
Or a personal situation where you just felt like the walls were closing in.
Right.
And think about how that impacted your ability to think straight, to make good decisions. It's scary.
It's when we're at our most vulnerable.
Right. And that's exactly what Greene wants us to understand.
Yeah.
How can we apply this idea of creating psychological pressure, but doing it effectively without being, overly aggressive or bullying?
Right. It's not about being a jerk.
Right. It's about strategically limiting their options, creating that feeling of being closed in, and subtly influencing their decisions through this constant pressure.
It's a delicate dance, but when it's done right, it's incredibly powerful.
So, we've talked about psychological warfare, but we can't forget about morale.
Right, that's huge.
Right, especially when you're working with a group, a team, whatever. Greene talks about the importance of morale and unity. Seems obvious, but he goes so deep into it.
Yeah, he really breaks down the nuances of how to build that sense of shared purpose and how to maintain it.
It's more than just giving orders.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It's about motivating people. It's about giving them a cause that's bigger than themselves, something they can really get behind, almost like a crusade.
The crusade.
Yeah, it's about creating that sense of collective identity, of being part of something important. And usually there's this idea of a common enemy.
Yeah.
It could be a competitor, a shared challenge, even an opposing viewpoint. It doesn't have to be a person. But the crucial element is connecting each individual's survival and success to the success of the group.
So we're all in this together.
We're all in this together, sink or swim. And when people believe that, their commitment, their resilience, it just goes through the roof.
And he talks about moods, emotions being contagious.
Right. Enthusiasm is contagious. So is fear.
So is negativity.
Exactly. So it's crucial to cultivate that positive, unified emotional climate if you want to keep morale high.
Totally. And, he talks about leading by example. He uses Rommel as an example.
Oh, yeah, the desert fox.
Right. When your people see that you're committed, that you're willing to sacrifice for the cause, it inspires them to do the same.
Actions speak louder than words. Always.
Always. He even quotes Napoleon. He says, moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. It really emphasizes how important that psychological, emotional state is to achieving victory.
It's not just about having the biggest guns.
No. Greene outlines specific steps for cultivating this unity. Like rallying people around a cause that's, forward-looking, progressive,
Right. Something to strive for.
and identifying that common enemy, that us versus them mentality can be powerful.
It can be unifying, but it can also be dangerous if it's not channeled properly.
Right. Exactly. There's a dark side to that.
Yeah.
He also talks about idleness.
Oh, yeah. That can be deadly to morale.
Right. He says that it makes our energy, our chi, he calls it, stagnant. And that leads to disengagement.
It's like Russ.
It's like we're just, wasting away. And then he talks about rewards and punishments.
Right, using them strategically.
Like Napoleon was a master of that, knowing when to give a medal, when to, come down hard.
Yeah, it's about shaping behavior, reinforcing that unity.
And then, who can forget Hannibal's speech to his troops before facing the Romans?
Yeah.
He basically frames it as freedom or slavery.
Pretty stark choice.
It is. And that kind of emotional appeal, it can really forge that unbreakable bond. So for you, the listener, think about this. How do you cultivate unity and shared purpose in your teams, your projects, even your relationships? What's your cause?
Yeah, what are you fighting for?
And are you leading by example? Because that's what people are really looking at. They're watching you.
Right, they're taking their cues from you.
So we've talked about offense. Let's switch gears and talk about defense. Greene has this whole chapter on the strategy of the defensive and choosing battles carefully.
It seems counterintuitive, right? When you think about war, you think about attack.
Yeah, you think about charging into battle. But Greene actually reframes defense. It's not about weakness. It's not about retreating.
Right.
It's about strategically using defense to gain power.
It's about picking your battles.
Yeah. He talks about this principle of perfect economy. And that means understanding your limitations, being really picky about what you engage in.
And everything is worth fighting for.
Right. You don't have to respond to every little provocation.
And sometimes the smartest move is to do nothing. To wait.
Yeah, to let things play out.
Yeah.
And he's really good at pointing out the hidden costs of engaging in conflict.
Yeah, we often don't think about that.
We don't. We think about the immediate battle.
Yeah.
But there's the cost of time,
Yeah.
resources, the damage to relationships, the potential for resentment and retaliation later on.
It's like that saying, revenge is a dish best served cold.
Right. And sometimes the most strategic move is to exercise patience, to undermine your adversaries over time, subtly, rather than just going head to head.
It's like playing the long game.
Yeah. Conserve your energy for the battles that really matter, the ones you have a good chance of winning.
And when you do have to fight, make sure you're fighting on your terms.
Exactly. Greene talks about dictating the terms of engagement. He uses the example of England defending against the Spanish Armada.
Oh, yeah.
The English had smaller, faster ships, better tactics. They used the Armada size against them. They forced them to fight in a way that played to England's strengths.
And they won a decisive victory without having to engage in a massive head-to-head battle.
Exactly. It's about strategy. And then there's General Gropp in Vietnam. He was up against a much stronger, more technologically advanced enemy.
The U.S.
Yeah. And he turned his weaknesses, his lack of heavy weaponry, into strengths. He used guerrilla tactics, exploited the terrain. He played a long game, a defensive game, and it worked.
He wore them down.
Yeah. So for you, the listener, think about this. Are you always the first one to jump into action?
Yeah.
Or are you taking a step back and assessing, is this a battle worth fighting? What are the hidden costs? How can I leverage my strengths and exploit their weaknesses? It's about being a strategist, not just a fighter.
Right. Thinking things through.
All right. So we've talked about defense. Now let's talk about counterattack.
Okay.
Counterattack and exploiting weakness. It's kind of related to defense.
Yeah, it's like the next step.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the art of letting the enemy make the first move
Okay.
and then using that against them.
Like judo.
Yeah.
Using their momentum against them.
Yeah, turning their aggression into your advantage.
Greene talks about turning your weaknesses into strengths.
Right. So a smaller force can be more mobile. A weaker reputation means you have less to lose, so you can take more risks.
You can be bolder.
And he uses T.E. Lawrence, again, the capture of Aqaba. He basically fakes a retreat, lures the Ottomans into the desert, and then, bam, counterattacks.
The feigned loop maneuver.
Yeah. And then there's, the Allied response to the Blitzkrieg, initial setbacks, and then a massive counteroffensive that turned the tide.
It's about being patient, waiting for the right moment.
And then he uses this funny analogy, the elephant trap from Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, I love that.
Where Pooh pretends to be vulnerable, and then the elephant falls into the pit.
It's about playing possum.
Yeah. And then there's Robert the Bruce. He was always outnumbered by the English, but he would use these, like, seemingly reckless tactics that would actually psych them out.
It's about audacity.
Yeah. So for you, the listener, think about how you can use surprise and counterattack to your advantage. Have you ever turned a weakness into a strength? It's about being adaptable, turning the tables, being ready to strike when they least expect it.
It's about being a little bit unpredictable.
Okay, let's talk about a strategy that's a little more intense, a little riskier.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Creating urgency and desperation. Greene calls it the death ground tactic.
That sounds intense.
It is. It's about intentionally raising the stakes, forcing decisive action.
Putting yourself in a corner.
Yeah, you're basically putting yourself in a situation where failure is not an option. You're cutting off your retreat.
You're burning the ships.
Yeah, you're going all in. And Greene uses Ted Williams as an example, the baseball player.
Oh, yeah.
He seemed to thrive on that us against the world mentality. He would even use the press, who were always criticizing him, to fuel his performance.
So it's like turning negative energy into positive energy?
Exactly. So for the listener, think about the times you've performed at your best. Was it when you had that sense of urgency, that feeling of like, I have to do this? And can you create that feeling for yourself? It's a gamble, but it can be incredibly motivating.
It's about tapping into that primal drive.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about control,
Okay.
but also decentralization, the importance of control and decentralization. It seems like a contradiction, but Greene explains it really well.
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah. He starts by saying, be careful about shared leadership.
Especially in high-pressure situations.
You need a clear chain of command.
Someone needs to be calling the shots.
Like Frederick the Great, General Marshall, Vongi, and Jap, they all understood that. But then he pivots and talks about the power of fluid, adaptable groups.
Right.
So the key is decentralizing your forces. Give them clear missions, but let them figure out how to execute them.
Empower them.
Yeah. Smaller teams are faster, more creative. They can adapt to changing conditions. So you get more control by actually giving up some control.
It's about trusting your people.
Yeah. So for the listener, what's your leadership style? Are you a micromanager or are you a delegator? It's about finding that sweet spot.
Giving people the freedom to excel.
Okay, now let's talk about deception.
Ooh, I like this one.
Distorting the enemy's perception. This is all about manipulating the information they receive.
Making them see what you want them to see.
Yeah, controlling the narrative. Greene talks about distorting signals, burning more or fewer campfires to make your army look bigger or smaller.
Classic tactic.
Moving your troops in ways that suggest you're going to attack one place when you're really going to attack another.
Misdirection.
Yeah. Feeding false information to spies. It's all about messing with their heads.
Planting those seeds of doubt.
He uses Genghis Khan as an example. He would use these slow, deliberate movements to lull his enemies into a false sense of security, and then, bam, he would hit them with these lightning-fast attacks.
It's like the calm before the storm.
Yeah. And then there's Rommel, who surprised the Allies in North Africa by striking first. And Sherman's march through Georgia, which was as much about psychological warfare as it was about military objectives.
It was about demoralizing the enemy, breaking their will.
So for you, the listener, think about this. How can you use these more subtle forms of deception to keep your opponents off balance?
It's about controlling the information landscape.
Yeah.
Making them doubt what they think they know.
It's about playing mind games.
All right, let's talk about the strategy of the ordinary extraordinary. It's a mouthful, but it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, what's that about?
It's about the power of surprise, of doing the unexpected.
Keep them guessing.
Yeah. Greene says that people tend to predict behavior based on patterns, on what's normal. And your opportunity is to disrupt those patterns.
Break the mold.
Yeah. So you start by being conventional, by doing what they expect, and then, bam, you hit them with something completely unexpected.
It's like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Exactly. The shock, the disorientation, it's much greater than if you had just attacked them head on.
It catches them off guard.
He also says, don't rely on the same trick twice. Once it's not a surprise anymore, it loses its power.
It becomes predictable.
And sometimes the most extraordinary thing you could do to be ordinary. He uses the example of the Ali Liston fight. Ali was the underdog, but he fought a very conventional fight, which threw Liston off.
Because he wasn't expecting it.
Exactly. And Greene emphasizes the importance of avoiding what he calls psychological aging.
Yeah.
Getting stuck in your ways, becoming predictable.
It's about staying young at heart, mentally agile.
Yeah, always be willing to try new things. to think outside the box.
Keep him guessing.
Okay, let's talk about traps.
Okay.
Avoiding traps and creating dilemmas. This is about disrupting those situations where you're stuck. Stalemates?
When nothing seems to be working.
Yeah, you're just spinning your wheels. And Greene says that this can be really dangerous. It can lead to, like, mental paralysis.
You feel like you're losing control.
Exactly. So you need to break that deadlock. He uses Sherman again as an example. During the Civil War, Sherman would do these sudden, unexpected things. He would change direction, speed up, slow down, just to disrupt the enemy's rhythm.
Throw them off balance.
Yeah, make them react in ways they're not used to. And the goal is to create dilemmas.
Not just problems.
Right. A problem is something you can solve. A dilemma is a choice between two bad options.
Yeah, it's a no-win situation.
And you want to constantly be maneuvering your opponent into those situations. So no matter what they do, they lose.
They're trapped.
So for you, the listener, think about this. When you're stuck in a stalemate, how can you break it? What unexpected moves can you make? Can you create a dilemma for the other side? It's about thinking strategically, creatively.
It's about finding those unconventional solutions.
Okay, let's talk about the moral battlefield. Moral warfare and controlling the narrative.
This is important.
It's huge. Greene says that conflicts aren't just about physical force. They're about perception.
It's about winning hearts and minds.
Yeah. It's about how your actions are seen by others. And he says, be strategic about exposing your enemy's hypocrisy.
Show people their true colors.
But don't just whine about it. Present it in a way that resonates with people. Undermine their support.
It's about discrediting them.
And the most important thing is to maintain the moral high ground.
Yeah, if you lose that, you've lost the war.
If you're seen as the bad guy, any move you make can be used against you.
Even if it's justified.
So, be aware of how your actions are perceived. Are you actively shaping the narrative? Are you staying true to your values? It's about being ethical and strategic at the same time.
It's a tough balance.
All right, let's talk about the bigger picture.
Okay.
The limits of force and the power of ideas. This is about thinking long-term.
Beyond the immediate battle.
Greene warns against getting caught up in that cycle of endless aggression. It's self-destructive.
It's like an addiction.
Yeah, you need